Welcome back to the channel Richard Munang, where solutions to the environmental challenges and to the economic challenges that we face in our world today and in Africa especially are discussed. On this channel, as you already know today, we are discussing a topic that many have heard: climate change and security. Climate change and security, how is it affecting the continent, and what can we do to be able to ensure that at least we build resilience? Please, as always click on subscribe and click on notifications so that anytime a new video is up, you will be the first to receive it. Until then, I'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back, and the discussion is about climate change and security, but starting off, it's good to put it in perspective with this African proverb: a regular fighter who discards peace is bound to be fought by his own anger. This African proverb underscores the high value of peace. So valuable is peace that even battle-hardened fighters desire it. It therefore goes without a question that all legal avenues to pursue it need to be exploited to the fullest. Climate action is one of these avenues. But why is peace so valuable? That's the question we'll have to answer today. Africa, for example, as a region that already lacks the rest of the globe in actualizing the Sustainable Development Goals, and in which progress has stagnated, suffers their losses from conflict. Currently, about 30% of countries in the region are afflicted by conflict, and this causes a 2.5% lower annual growth relative to no conflict scenario. Conflict and fragile countries lost an opportunity to double their GDP over a period of 20 years. Cumulatively, Africa loses an estimated 15% of its GDP every year because of conflicts. The losses suffered by some of the region's hotspots over the years are typically, considering that conflict depletes precious resources needed to address critical socio-economic priorities of these countries. For example, the infamous Darfur conflict in Sudan cost over $40 billion, equivalent to 171% of its GDP. Which is still ongoing, consuming up to 13% of GDP in a society that lacks the means to provide the basic entitlements of education, of food, of healthcare, of shelter to its people. The country has spent only 1.3% of its budget on public health and less than 1% on education over the past 2 decades. If you take example of the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's yet another country that has lost up to 4 million people and over $10 billion, or 29% of its GDP to conflicts. Yet it has the third largest population of poor people globally. Liberia, Sierra Leone, Burundi have lost up to $31.8 billion, respectively. Yes, they are also part of the least developed countries. In recent times, non-state armed groups, especially through terrorism, have been one of the leading drivers of conflict-related costs in Africa beyond conventional wars. Accordingly, Africa has lost over $119 billion to terrorism in a decade starting 2017. These figures are costing Africa a lot, and Africa's share of the global economy cost has increased from 4.2% to 20.3% a decade over. As these losses are, climate change comes in as a risk multiplier, with already highly vulnerable regions in the world being in the African continent. The science tells us that while climate change is projected to shrink economies and incomes globally by an average of 23% every year, incomes in developing countries already disproportionately vulnerable will decline by 75%. Africa's economies face a shrinkage of up to 15% in the next 9 years and up to 85% in just 20 years from today. This heightens the stakes at hand. The loss of traditional livelihoods, which encourages some individuals to explore membership of armed groups as a potential alternative source, is something we cannot ignore. So how can we address this? How can we move from talk to action? The first is to effectively address the nexus of climate change and conflict. We need a paradigm shift in the narrative and deployment of military resources alone. It is time that this arsenal is enriched with an additional tool underpinned by an insightful African proverb: money is sharper than the sword. If you take the Sahel, for example, it provides a typical case study to demonstrate this nexus of climate change leading to socio-economic distress and, in turn, fueling conflict due to diminished opportunities. Where people lack socio-economic opportunities, their stake in a peaceful society is diminished. You understand that? In other words, what I am saying is that they have little to lose in the absence of peace. Let's face it. The Sahel, for example, emits less than 3% of the greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change, that just one industrialized countries emit. But temperatures are rising as we speak today at 1.5 times faster than the global average. The Sahel is experiencing extreme temperatures as we speak today, fluctuating rainfall and drought, all of which degrade land, change grazing patterns, and reduce water supply for both animals and people. Just one country, for instance, loses up to 100,000 acres of arable land every year. Such losses have jeopardized food and livelihood security, driven strife, competition for limited opportunities, and compounded insecurity. Deploying military solutions alone had a subpar impact. Tactical successes do not translate into overall progress. So what is the message here? It's simple. We must create socio-economic opportunities for people, because this is a critical strategy to incentivize peace building, as communities will find a stake in maintaining peace. And how climate action can unlock such opportunities is very, very important, and we cannot ignore this. This needs not to be complex, capital-intensive solutions. For example, just 0.3% of the sun that shines in the Sahel region has been quoted as nearly equivalent to all of Spain's energy needs. If we decentralize simple, affordable climate action solutions of solar dryer to pastoralist communities, where over 60% of the population are engaged in, enables them to address the animals or dry the animals before the onset of droughts and enable them to dry and preserve the meat, can potentially reduce depreciation in value by up to 6 times. This translates to more incomes in their pockets and savings for communities, which will incentivize locally generated peace and even dissuade the temptation of being lured into terrorism and crimes, because people can earn income. That takes me to the second point, which is important. The focus of actions should be to strengthen the informal sector and youth-driven enterprises that deliver on-demand, market-viable climate solutions. To be impactful in any venture, priority must be on an area of strength. Africa's economic participation comprises up to 80% of informal sector players, and youth, who are 60%, form the most significant group of implementers in the continent. These critical constituencies have hitherto not featured in climate and environmental action mainstream most of the time, and this is an opportunity for climate action that has so far remained untapped. Just to give a practical example, the charcoal industry in Africa, while being informal, is responsible for adding over 20 billion into the continent's economy. It is also at the core of fueling terrorism activity. For example, in East Africa, Al-Shabaab terror organization is reported to generate over $380 million every year from the illicit charcoal trade. But what happens if the market shifts to an alternative product that is climate friendly? This is what climate action solutions of waste recovery to clean cooking briquettes presents. While clean cooking briquettes have clear market advantages in terms of being up to 2 times cheaper than charcoal, clean climate advantages by minimizing forest degradation, which is the majority driver of land-based emissions that accounts for over 50% of Africa's emissions, and clear health benefits by minimizing indoor pollution that kills up to over 700 Africans' precious souls each year. Availability of this alternative is at a low 1%. Engaging everyone to incentivize the informal sector that produces nearly all of charcoal in Africa to shift their business model towards climate action solutions of waste recovery to fuel briquettes, to then shift consumer preferences towards fuel briquettes, will go a long way in stemming an easy source revenue for terror groups across Africa. This dimension should be a subject of economic collaboration between militaries and African countries and the population towards addressing the climate change and conflict nexus in Africa. It is better to live like a lion for 1 day rather than 100 years as a sheep. This African proverb, in my understanding, this African proverb would be an ideal mindset to champion in any successful military operation, given the grave yet essential responsibility that we have to take to be able to drive transformational climate change. So I call on everyone today to use this approach, the tenets of climate change and conflict nexus, because if we do so, we'll create opportunities and build a climate resilient, peaceful Africa and the world. Thank you.